Hey guys, Angus here, and I'm going to explain to you in this video everything you should have learned in school about metabolism. So I'm going to pop stuff up on the screen here, and we're going to go through things bit by bit to build up a big picture. So starting off here with food. So we have food, we eat food, we know we eat food. Food contains calories, food contains energy, food contains macronutrients, and food contains carbon. So the carbon makes up in the food. If you don't track your food, you're just eating food, you don't know what you're having, but it goes into the system, the body will know. So the best thing you can kind of do at the beginning stage is when you're dealing with food is maybe have a look at it, particularly if your goal is fat loss, fitness improvement, is having a look at what is the total amount of calories in the food you're eating, what is macro breakdown. Now, of course, food labels can be off, calorie tracking apps can be off, but it's way better than guessing. So the next thing coming up is thermal effect of food, TEF, and digestion. So when you digest some of the foods, they have different thermal effects. They cost calories to break down the food. So food goes into your digestive system and gets broken down. Now, if it just passes straight through your digestive system and you poo it out, that food was never in you, and they do loads of studies on different people, and some people will actually poo out more calories or poo out the food that the calories don't actually get absorbed in the body. So if they don't get absorbed in the body, they're not really in you. Same with people who have eating disorders where they make themselves sick. That food's not really in you. You ate the food, threw it up, you never absorbed the calories. It didn't get broken down into tiny molecules and pass the barrier. So next up here, after the food is broken down, it goes into your bloodstream. Now, when the food's broken down into your bloodstream, it's because it's digested into tiny molecules. Carbohydrates are broken down into tiny little glucose molecules, and they're tiny. Protein's broken down into amino acids, and fat is broken down into a thing called triglycerides. So here they are. So it's protein, carbohydrates, and fat. This is your three things that are broken into. And I've done these as little shelves. So the protein, we'll start off with protein. So protein can go to lean body mass. So lean body mass is everything that's not fat mass. It's bones, it's your muscles, it's your liver, it's your brain, it's your organs, etc. So protein will go there. So you've got to think about a brick wall, or the way Dr. Stuart Phillips, who's a protein researcher, discusses it. He calls it a brick wall. So it's a brick wall. So sometimes the bricks have to get replaced. So that's when you add a new protein. So the brick wall's kind of crumbling all the time. And when that crumbles, those crumbles go back into the bloodstream, and sometimes they're viable, and sometimes you just pass them through urine. Sometimes still have calories in them, and they'll get recycled and reused. But when we take a new protein, we repair those brick walls. There's a certain amount of protein we need to eat per day to get that in. So protein goes into lean muscle mass, but lean muscle mass can also be broken down and go back into this protein tray. And any protein that's left over from there will become glucogenic, which just means that it becomes glucose, and it will go into the carbohydrate tray. The next macronutrient to look at is carbohydrates. So, as I said before, any protein left over will go into this carbohydrate tray. Again, it's not really in tray, it's floating around the bloodstream, and it will go over here into a thing called glycogen. So glycogen is where you store carbohydrates in your muscles. We store about 2,000 calories worth of carbohydrates within our liver and within our muscles. The liver is mainly to supply the brain because the brain uses mostly glucose, or almost exclusively glucose. Now, here's a thing about glycogen. If you're insulin resistant, you're going to have trouble pushing that carbohydrates into your muscles because the actual cell isn't allowing it in, so the insulin comes along and the cell is insulin resistant, and insulin is the molecule that grabs the glucose and tries to get it in there. So then what will happen with carbohydrates, it will just keep circling around your bloodstream, it will go to the liver, and it will convert to fat. There's another reason you could be insulin resistant without actually being insulin resistant, and that's if your glycogen stores are full. So if you're fully stocked with glycogen, there's nowhere to put the carbohydrates. So you might not even have insulin resistance. You just might be eating too much carbohydrates and never emptying out these carbohydrate stores. Also, another way to say it is, if you've not eaten and you're half full, say you're half full with glycogen, that glycogen can spill into the bloodstream at any time you need it. So if you do a high intensity workout, if you get stressed, that glycogen will pour in. And depending on how metabolically flexible you are, that on-off switch will really play a role in how you attack fat. So the next thing, so if carbohydrates are going round and round, they can't store in your glycogen stores, they will just simply go to the liver and convert into fat. Now, excess fat floating around your bloodstream does not need a hormone to store. Fat can store as fat without any help of anything. It's the same thing, it just gets sucked into the fat cell and lives there quite happily. So fat, leftover fat can become body fat. It's also a two-way gate. What a lot of people don't realize is if you're not consuming enough energy throughout the day, body fat will just go back into this fat pool, which is again in your bloodstream, and will circle around and just get burned off as activity. So fat is a two-way street, and we're always storing fat in our fat cells, and we're always taking fat out of our fat cells, and it swings both ways. And what you're looking for is the net to use up more fat than you're storing per day. So if you have a big meal, that fat will go into the fat cell, and as that energy is kind of dissipated and used, you'll just kind of tap into that and that will come back out. These macronutrients will go into a thing called your TDEE, which is your total daily energy expenditure. That is split up into two groups. So you got your RMR, which is your resting metabolic rate. This is the amount of calories you're going to use, or the amount of energy you're going to use at rest. So 24 hours a day, if you say you use 2,400 calories at rest, which is an awful lot, but just to make the maths easy, you'd use 100 calories an hour. Most people are around about 60 calories per hour just to keep the lights on, keep your heart beating, the breathing, general movement, cellular turnover, etc. That's TDE. So your protein, carbs, and fat will go into your RMR to keep the lights on, to keep the system going. And then the other part of your total daily energy expenditure is activity. So activity is split into two groups, eat and NEAT. Eat just exercise activity thermogenesis, and EAT is non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So me moving my hands, that's NEAT. It's an unconscious movement. People tapping their foot, it's an unconscious movement. Blinking is an unconscious movement. Taking a walk to the toilet is unconscious movement. And formal exercise, like you're going to spin class, would be formal movement. I don't like these two things because NEAT is actually unconscious movement. So a lot of people will say, hey, to keep your NEAT up, go for a walk, but that's choosing a conscious exercise. I would rather split these into low intensity and high intensity exercise. A majority of this you're going to choose because your NEAT you don't really have any control over, and some people have really fast kind of metabolisms where they'll tap, they'll dissipate energy, the body heat will increase, they'll poo out more calories in their food. So, you know, two people eating 2,000 calories can have a completely different outcome with that calories depending on how this energy goes through the system. So this is my quick overview of how I look at energy.